The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the frost when Sarah Merchant discovered the gate to her chicken coop hanging open. Not just ajar, twisted on its hinges, the simple latch torn clean away. Her stomach dropped before her mind could catch up. 16 chickens. She'd been keeping them for 3 years now, a small, sustainable hobby that had blossomed into something she genuinely loved. Rhode Island Reds, Wyandottes, a few Leghorns. She knew each one by sight, had names for her favorites. They weren't just pets. They were part of her morning ritual, part of the rhythm of her life on the 2-acre property she'd bought specifically to escape the suffocating suburbia she'd grown up in. Sarah pushed through the gate, her breath misting in the cold air. The coop itself looked undisturbed, the roost area, the nesting boxes, everything in place. But something was wrong. The birds were agitated, clustered in the far corner, and when she counted, her chest tightened. 15. She did it again, counted more carefully this time. 15 chickens. Snowball, her favorite Wyandotte, white as her name suggested, with a personality that made Sarah laugh nearly every morning, was gone. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked the coop's perimeter. No predator damage, no signs of struggle. The wire mesh was intact, undamaged. Someone had opened the gate and taken her chicken. Or, the thought hit her like cold water, someone had let them out and Snowball had gotten loose. She spent the next 2 hours walking her property, calling Snowball's name, checking the edges where the trees pressed close to the fenced yard. Nothing. By the time she came back inside, defeated and muddy, Sarah had convinced herself the chicken had somehow escaped during the night. These things happened. She'd read the forums. You did everything right, and sometimes you still lost birds. But later that afternoon, while she was making coffee, Sarah noticed something through her kitchen window that made her pause. Movement at the tree line that bordered her property and the woods beyond. She squinted. 2 figures, children. They were moving along the fence line, and one of them was carrying something. Sarah set down her mug and went outside. As she approached, the figures became clearer. A boy, maybe 10 years old, and a girl who looked about 8. They were both dressed in expensive athletic wear, the kind that made Sarah think of the neighborhood sprawling just beyond the woods, where the houses cost 4 times what hers had. They didn't belong here. This section of her property was overgrown, bordered by forest, not the kind of place kids just wandered into. "Hey," Sarah called out, "can I help you?" The boy wheeled around, his eyes wide. The girl did too, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. In her small hands was a wire cage, the kind used for transporting small animals. It was empty. "Are you looking for something?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice level. "We were just," the boy started. "Walking," the girl finished quickly. Sarah studied them. They were definitely from the neighborhood. There was something about their bearing, the way they dressed, the expensive watches both of them wore. She'd learned in the year since she'd moved out here that the residential development that had sprouted up 3 miles away was populated by a particular type of family. People who made good money doing important things in the city and had decided they wanted to live in the country without actually doing any of the work country living required. "Walking in my woods?" Sarah asked. "We live nearby," the boy said, gesturing vaguely toward the tree line. "This is private property," Sarah said, not unkindly, just factually. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't cut through." "We weren't," the girl started. "Come on," the boy said, tugging her arm. "Let's go." They hurried back toward the woods, their expensive sneakers kicking up leaves. Sarah watched them go, her mind churning. The empty cage, the way they'd panicked at being caught, the fact that one of her chickens was missing. She told herself she was being paranoid. Kids wandered, they found cages, coincidences happened. But when she went back inside and pulled up the footage from the security camera she'd installed above the coop 3 months ago, a simple decision after a raccoon had gotten in and killed 2 birds, she felt something cold settle in her chest. The timestamp read 6:47 a.m., before dawn when the light was still gray and uncertain. And there, clear as day, were the same 2 children, but there were 2 other figures with them, an adult woman and another child. The woman was opening the coop gate, not struggling with it. She had a key. Sarah watched as the woman scattered feed across the coop floor. The birds, startled awake, panicked. They clucked and ran in circles. The woman was saying something, her mouth moving, but the camera didn't capture audio. Then Sarah saw it. One of her birds, she couldn't tell which from the angle, but it looked like Snowball, spooked by the commotion, bolted from the coop. It ran straight at the woman, who shrieked and jumped back. The bird's wing caught on the fence post as it tried to escape. It fell, struggled, got up. The footage continued for another minute. The children and the woman gathered the escaped bird. Gently, Sarah could see that much, and put it in the cage. Then they closed the gate, not locked it, just closed it. And the woman pocketed something, the key. Sarah rewound the footage, played it again. Her heart was hammering. The woman's face was clear in the morning light. She was blonde, probably mid-40s, wearing what looked like designer athleisure wear. She had a hard, beautiful face. The kind of face Sarah recognized from her neighborhood Facebook group, where this woman had been very vocal about various community issues. Karen Whitmore. She'd seen the name on at least a dozen angry posts about property values and undesirable elements moving into the neighborhood. Sarah's hands were shaking as she picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. The officer who arrived 40 minutes later was a woman named Detective Reeves, with gray streaking her dark hair and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard a lot of neighborhood disputes and very few of them mattered. She reviewed the footage without much expression. "Did she take anything?" Reeves asked. "My chicken," Sarah said. "She's in the cage at the end of the video." "And the chicken is yours?" "Yes, she's one of 16 birds I keep in that coop. I have it all documented. I have a license for the birds. They're registered with the county." "Okay," Reeves said, holding up her hand. "And you're pressing charges for what? Trespassing?" "Theft," Sarah said. "She took my bird." Reeves reviewed the footage again. "The bird left the coop voluntarily. The woman caught it and put it in a cage. That's not technically theft." "She broke into my coop," Sarah said, her voice rising. "She opened the gate." "Do you recognize this woman?" Reeves asked. Sarah hesitated. "She looks like someone I've seen on the neighborhood Facebook page, Karen Whitmore." Reeves sighed. "I know Karen Whitmore. She lives over in Ridgemont Heights. What I'm saying is, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You could take her to small claims court if you want to claim damages to your gate, or if a chicken is missing, you could file a report of lost property. But as far as criminal charges go, what we have here is pretty thin." "She trespassed on my property," Sarah said. "Did you have the property posted? No trespassing signs?" Sarah hadn't. She'd assumed the fence was enough. "Then it's not technically trespassing," Reeves said. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I've dealt with Karen Whitmore before. She's litigious. She likes to play neighbor disputes as revenge fantasies. Whatever's happening here, my advice is to document everything, put up signs, and consider a better gate lock. If she comes back, call us again. But right now, all you've got is someone retrieving what they apparently believe is their property." "What do you mean their property?" Sarah asked. "Has anyone contacted you about a missing chicken?" Reeves asked. Sarah hadn't checked her phone. She did now. 3 messages from an unknown number, all within the past few hours. "Is this the person with the chickens on Ashford Road? Our daughter's chicken got loose yesterday, and we believe you have it. Please call us back immediately. Our lawyer will be in contact if you don't return our property by EOD." Sarah's blood ran cold. She called the number back. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, controlled, like a blade wrapped in silk. "This is Karen Whitmore." "This is Sarah Merchant," Sarah said. "You came onto my property this morning without permission." "I came to retrieve my daughter's chickens," Karen said, "which you've clearly been keeping here. I have video evidence of all 3 of them in your coop." Sarah started to say it was a lie, but she stopped. Was it? Could Karen also have footage? Could there be? "Did you really think no one would notice?" Karen continued. 3 purebred Wyandotte chicks from a breeder in Massachusetts, worth $400 each? My daughter has been devastated. I tried to reach you civilly, but it seems you weren't home. So yes, I went into that coop and retrieved our property. What I should have done was call the police and reported you for theft." "I didn't steal your chickens," Sarah said. "Then why are they in your coop?" Karen asked. "Why would you have 3 birds that perfectly match my daughter's?" The world tilted. Sarah's mind raced back through the past weeks. When had she gotten her birds? She'd picked up several at a farm sale about a month ago. The farmer had said he had a few extras, sold her 6 birds at a discount. She'd gotten bills of sale, probably. She tried to remember. No, actually she hadn't. The farmer was running a discount operation, cash only, no paperwork. She'd been focused on getting good birds at a good price. She hadn't questioned it. "I have documentation," Karen said. "I have the breeder's registry. I have photos from before they went missing. and I have a camera installed that shows your fence line. I documented every time my children noticed the birds had disappeared. Do you understand what you've done?" Sarah's mouth had gone dry. "I'm going to give you one chance," KARENS said. "All the birds that are mine return to my property by tomorrow evening, an apology in writing, and $500 for veterinary bills and emotional distress. If you don't comply, I'm filing a report with the police, the Animal Welfare Board, and my attorney will sue you for the full value of the birds plus punitive damages. Do you understand?" "I don't think," Sarah tried. KARENS hung up. Sarah stood in her kitchen, phone hanging at her side, and felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd bought birds from a farmer. That was all. But she had no paperwork. She had no way to prove where they'd come from, and KARENS had video of her children walking near the woods. Unless... Sarah pulled up the security footage again. She watched it frame by frame. The woman opened the gate. She had a key. How did KARENS have a key to her coop? Sarah checked the coop again. She'd had the lock for 3 years. It was a simple key lock, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. There were probably 1,000 like it in circulation. She sat down on her back porch as the sun began to set, turning the sky the color of a bruise. In her mind, she was constructing the timeline. A month ago, she'd bought 6 birds. 3 weeks ago, had anyone been at her property? Any strangers? She'd gone into the city for a weekend. Had she left the gate unlocked? Her neighbor, Tom, had come by to borrow a ladder. That had to have been around then. He'd been in her backyard. He could have. But no, why would Tom let his neighbor, KARENS, access her coop? Unless KARENS had given him a key, offered him money, or threatened him somehow. Sarah realized she was spiraling. She forced herself to think logically. What she knew, she had 3 birds that apparently belonged to KARENS Whitmore. KARENS had evidence of this. Sarah had no way to prove she'd purchased them legitimately. KARENS had already been on her property, had presumably taken at least 1 bird back, and had a clear evidence path that included video and the breeder's registry. What Sarah didn't know, how the birds had gotten into her coop in the first place. Whether KARENS had actually put them there deliberately. Whether the children had really lost them, or if KARENS was lying. What Sarah needed, to figure out exactly what had happened before she responded to KARENS' demands. The problem was, she had until tomorrow evening to figure it out. Sarah went inside and opened her laptop. She pulled up the neighborhood Facebook page and searched for KARENS Whitmore's profile. It took her a moment to find it, but when she did, she understood immediately what she was dealing with. KARENS Whitmore had posted something on the community page nearly every day for the past 2 months. Complaints about noise coming from a property 3 streets over. A rant about the county not responding to her calls about a pothole. A series of increasingly aggressive messages about property values being destroyed by people who didn't belong. An entire thread arguing that the neighborhood should hire private security because the police weren't doing their jobs. And then 8 weeks ago, a post that made Sarah's stomach drop. Does anyone have info on the woman who moved into the old Harper place on Ashford? She claims she's keeping sustainable agriculture, but I'm pretty sure those are chickens I see. Has anyone else noticed the smell? Is this even legal? Asking for a friend, but also asking for all of us. 43 comments, most supportive. A few actually helpful, pointing out that chickens were legal in the county up to a certain number. But the tone was clear. KARENS had decided Sarah was a problem, and she was determined to make a case of it. Sarah closed the laptop. Her head was pounding. She looked at the coop, at her birds settling in for the night. She looked at the gate, which now sat open because Detective Reeves had never asked her to close it, and she'd been too shell-shocked to do it herself. What she didn't realize was that KARENS had been watching, not from afar but from the tree line, waiting to see if Sarah would close the gate, waiting to see what her next move would be. And in the darkness gathering at the edge of the property, KARENS Whitmore was already planning her next move. Because this wasn't about the chickens, not really. It had never been about the chickens. This was about a woman who'd moved into KARENS' carefully curated world and refused to acknowledge KARENS' authority over it. This was about a woman who'd chosen to keep animals instead of a manicured lawn, who'd chosen solitude instead of coffee dates, who'd chosen authenticity instead of the performative version of rural living that KARENS and her set had decided was acceptable. Sarah had made a mistake by existing in KARENS' neighborhood while being someone KARENS could not control or understand. And Karen Whitmore, as Sarah would soon learn, was not a woman who took kindly to mistakes. The next morning brought no apology, no resolution, no solution, only the beginning of everything falling apart. Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the night reviewing footage, walking her property, and trying to construct a defense against accusations she didn't fully understand. By the time dawn broke, she'd made a decision. She would take the birds back to the farmer who'd sold them to her. She would demand copies of the original receipt, proof of purchase, anything that could establish a clear chain of custody. The problem was that the farmer, she remembered now with growing dread, had been running his operation out of a roadside stand. Not a formal business with a brick-and-mortar location. She had the address written on a scrap of paper somewhere, but she wasn't even sure it was complete. She found it in a junk drawer, a street name, no number. Miller's Farm, Hatchery Road. It took her 3 hours of driving to find it. The farm wasn't there anymore. The roadside stand was gone, replaced by a for sale sign advertising 7 acres of commercial real estate. When she asked at a nearby property, an older man told her that Miller had sold out about 6 months ago and moved to upstate New York. Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot of a now-defunct farm and felt something fundamental break inside her. By the time she got home, it was past 2 in the afternoon. She had less than 6 hours to respond to KARENS' demands. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should call a lawyer, but lawyers were expensive. A consultation alone would cost more than the $500 Karen was demanding. And Sarah's financial situation, while comfortable, wasn't the kind where she could hemorrhage money on legal fees for a dispute that might blow over. She called Tom, her neighbor. "I need to know if Karen Whitmore has ever asked you anything about my property," she said without preamble. There was a long pause. "Tom, Sarah, I can't talk about this right now," he said. "She got a key to my coop from somewhere," Sarah said, "if you gave her permission to." "I said I can't talk about it," Tom said firmly. "Don't call me again about this. It's not worth it." He hung up. Sarah stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, and realized the full scope of what was happening. Karen had already started. She'd already talked to Tom. She'd already built her narrative in a way that made people want to distance themselves from Sarah rather than help her. The doorbell rang at 4 o'clock. Sarah opened it to find a man in a suit holding a document. He introduced himself as serving on behalf of Karen Whitmore and handed her a formal letter. It was printed on lawyer's letterhead, the words dense and official. In short, Karen Whitmore was formally requesting the return of 3 purebred Wyandotte chickens, valued at $1,200 total. She was requesting payment of $847 in veterinary bills related to stress and behavioral issues in her remaining birds after these 3 went missing. She was requesting $500 in damages for emotional distress to her minor children. She was requesting a written apology and a commitment that Sarah would never keep chickens in her coop again, as Karen believed the proximity was creating a nuisance condition that affected her property values. If these demands were not met within 48 hours, Karen would be filing a formal complaint with the County Animal Control Board, the police department, for theft, and would be pursuing civil litigation for the full amount plus court costs and attorney fees. The letter was signed by a lawyer named David Stern, whose office was downtown in the city. Sarah did a quick Google search. He specialized in HOA disputes and property law. He was very well reviewed. He was also, apparently, the kind of lawyer who would take a case like this. Sarah did the math quickly. The demands came to $2,547 before legal fees. A lawsuit could easily cost $10,000 or more, especially if Karen was willing to pursue it aggressively. Sarah did not have $10,000 in savings. She had maybe $8,000, and that was supposed to be for property maintenance and emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. She picked up her phone to call a lawyer, her own lawyer to defend herself, and realized she didn't have one. She'd bought the house cash, which had seemed like a smart move at the time but had left her without any legal infrastructure. Now, facing Karen's coordinated assault, that oversight felt catastrophic. Sarah spent the next 2 hours calling lawyers. Every consultation required a $250 retainer fee just to discuss the case. The lawyers she spoke to had a similar refrain. Without clear documentation of where she'd gotten the birds, and without witness testimony to back her up, she would have a difficult time proving she hadn't purchased them knowing they were stolen. The thing is, one lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, explained, you don't have to have stolen them knowingly. The burden is going to be on you to prove where they came from, and if the person you bought them from is gone, you're going to struggle. Can't I just return the birds? Sarah asked. You could, Patricia said, but you'd still be liable for her legal fees if she decides to pursue this. And the thing about people like Karen Whitmore, and I've dealt with her type before, is that they're not looking for the easy solution. They're looking for the victory. Capitulating might actually make her more aggressive because it will confirm that her intimidation tactics work. Sarah hung up the phone and sat in the dark of her kitchen, watching the blue glow of the laptop screen wash across her hands. She pulled up the Facebook group again, and this time she started scrolling through Karen's entire history. What she found was a pattern. In the last 3 years, Karen had complained about at least a dozen neighbors, a woman who'd painted her house a gaudy color, a man who'd started a small vegetable garden that Karen said was an eyesore, a family who'd gotten a dog that Karen claimed barked incessantly. Sarah had never heard it. An elderly couple who'd had construction done on their house. Karen had documented every moment of it and complained to the HOA. The pattern was clear. Karen's target was always someone different from her, someone making different choices, someone who wasn't part of the carefully curated neighborhood aesthetic that Karen had decided was correct. And every time Karen had escalated a complaint, the target had caved. The woman with the gaudy house had repainted it a neutral beige within a month. The man with the vegetable garden had torn it out after Karen started a petition. The family with the dog had sent it to a shelter rather than face Karen's determined legal campaign. Only the elderly couple had held out, and according to a post from 6 months ago, they'd sold their house and moved to Florida. Sarah sat back in her chair, the realization settling over her like a cold fog. Karen Whitmore had essentially weaponized property management to enforce a specific lifestyle, and she'd done it so effectively that people had simply given up rather than fight her. This was Sarah's choice then. Give up or fight someone who had already proven willing to go to extreme lengths to get her way. The video footage played through Sarah's mind again, the woman opening the gate with a key, the children gathering the bird, but something about it nagged at her. The woman had moved too confidently, too prepared. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision to retrieve a lost pet. Sarah rewound the footage again on her security camera. She zoomed in as much as the resolution would allow on the moment the woman put her hand on the latch. She was pulling something from her pocket. Not a key, Sarah realized with a start, a piece of paper. She consulted it, then opened the latch. She'd looked up the combination, which meant... Sarah pulled up the purchase records for the Coop. She'd bought it from a hardware store 3 years ago, the manual. She had the manual somewhere in a filing cabinet in the office upstairs. She found it in 10 minutes. 3-year-old paperwork, but there it was, the default combination for the padlock she'd been using. She'd changed it. She was almost certain she'd changed it, but had she actually recorded the new combination anywhere? Or had she just assumed she'd remember it? She couldn't remember changing it. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that she'd never actually changed it from the default. Which meant anyone with a manual could open her Coop. Which meant anyone on the internet could find that manual. Which meant Karen could have ordered this exact Coop, printed out the manual, and found the default combination in minutes. Sarah's hands were shaking as she walked to the Coop and examined the lock more closely. It was the original. She'd never upgraded it. And if she'd never changed the combination... She tried the default 1, 2, 3, 4. It opened. For a long moment, Sarah stood frozen, the lock hanging open in her palm as the full scope of what had happened became clear. Karen had not found Sarah with 3 stolen birds. Karen had systematically orchestrated a situation where Sarah would appear to have stolen birds. She'd probably watched the property. Maybe she'd even put the birds there herself, through the open gate, during one of Sarah's trips into the city. Then she'd reported them missing. Then she'd come to retrieve them conveniently on camera to create evidence of the theft. It was brilliant in an absolutely horrible way. It was also technically a crime. Breaking and entering, trespassing, potentially fraud if Karen had deliberately falsified the theft claim. But here's where the trap closed completely. If Sarah accused Karen of this, she'd have to prove it. And proving it would require financial resources she didn't have. Legal resources. Expert testimony, maybe. By the time she won, if she won, the cost would bankrupt her. That was KARENS' play. Make it more expensive to fight than to capitulate. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Your 48 hours are almost up. I hope you're making the right decision. Sarah called the lawyer again, Patricia Chen. I think I've figured out what she did, Sarah said. She explained her theory about the default combination, the manual, the methodical way Karen had set the trap. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Patricia said quietly, if you can prove that, you might have a case. But Sarah, proving intent is hard, really hard. And you're talking about accusing someone with money and a lawyer of deliberately committing multiple felonies to frame you. Can't I file a countersuit? Sarah asked. You could, Patricia said. But here's the problem. KARENS already filed her complaint with the police with animal control. Once that's in the system, you're defensive. You're the one responding to accusations, and the court is going to look at the evidence as presented, not your theory about what might have happened. Do you have clear proof that she put those birds in your coop? I have video of her opening my gate, Sarah said. With a key that you believe worked because you never changed the default combination. Which is on you, Sarah. I hate saying it, but that's how a judge will look at it. Sarah closed her eyes. What do you recommend? She asked. Get a lawyer, Patricia said. A real one, not a consultation. Someone who can represent you if this goes to court. Preserve all your evidence, and then make a strategic decision about whether you want to fight or settle. How much would a lawyer cost? Retainer, Patricia said. Probably $2,500 to $5,000, and then hourly fees on top of that. If this goes to court, you're looking at $10,000 to $25,000 minimum. Sarah calculated. She had $8,000 in savings. If she used it all to fight Karen and she lost, she'd have destroyed her financial security over some chickens. But if she capitulated, she'd be proving that Karen's tactic worked. And there was no guarantee that capitulating would actually stop Karen. Once she'd established that Sarah would cave under pressure, what would stop her from escalating? Sarah hung up with Patricia and went to sit on her porch. The chickens were settling in for the evening. They pecked at the ground, unaware that their existence had become a weapon in a war they hadn't started. She watched them for a long time. Then she got up, went inside, and opened her laptop. Karen wanted to play legal hardball. Sarah would give her legal hardball, but not the way Karen expected. Sarah began to document everything. Every Facebook post Karen had made, every complaint, every neighbor she'd gone after. She wrote down names of people she knew had been targeted. She made a list of the properties that had been sold in the neighborhood over the past 3 years and cross-referenced them with Karen's complaints. The pattern was clear and damning. Karen Whitmore had been waging a systematic campaign of intimidation against anyone who didn't conform to her vision of what the neighborhood should be. Then Sarah did something Karen probably hadn't anticipated. She went public. She created a new Facebook post on the community page. She wrote clearly, calmly, and with documentation. I want to make sure everyone is aware of what's currently happening in our community. Karen Whitmore has accused me of stealing 3 chickens that she claims belong to her. I want to be transparent about the facts of this situation, and then she laid out the timeline. However, this is part of a larger pattern I've noticed, where specific neighbors have been targeted with legal complaints and threats until they either capitulate or leave the community. I'm reaching out to see if others have experienced similar treatment. I'm willing to cooperate with anyone who has documentation of being harassed or intimidated by legal threats for simply making different lifestyle choices. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not paying for something I didn't do. If you've been through this, please reach out. She hit post at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before her deadline for responding to Karen's demands. Her phone exploded within minutes. The first response was from a woman named Jennifer Caldwell who'd painted her house blue. Karen had demanded she repaint it or face the consequences. Jennifer had caved within 3 weeks. Now, emboldened by Sarah's post, she replied, I painted it because I couldn't afford to fight her. I still hate the color. I'm required to keep it. If this helps, I'm in. The second response was from Marcus Washington, who'd tried to start a community garden. Karen had petitioned to have it declared a nuisance and submitted photos to the HOA claiming it was lowering property values. He'd given up within a month. His response to Sarah's post was a simple, I'll testify. By morning, Sarah had 17 people responding, some publicly, some in private messages. All of them had the same story. They'd made a choice that Karen didn't like, Karen had escalated, and they'd been forced to either change who they were or leave the community. It was a pattern of sustained harassment, masquerading as neighborhood advocacy. And Sarah had just made it public. Karen would not respond well. In fact, Karen's response came that evening in the form of 3 new posts on the Facebook community page, made from her account. I want to address the serious allegations made against me. I have never intimidated anyone. I am simply a concerned neighbor who cares deeply about maintaining our property values and our community standards. I defend myself legally when necessary, and I will absolutely defend myself in this case. To suggest that I am somehow running a campaign of harassment is absurd and, frankly, defamatory. The second post was more aggressive. If Sarah Merchant is allowed to make false and damaging claims about me publicly, then I will have no choice but to pursue additional legal action for defamation and tortious interference. I have documentation of every interaction, every email, and every attempt I've made to address legitimate neighborhood concerns. I'm happy to let a court decide who the real problem is here. The third post was perhaps the most disturbing, because it was the most reasonable sounding. I'm saddened that this has become confrontational. I was simply trying to retrieve my daughter's beloved pets. I've made an offer to resolve this matter, and if Sarah chooses to pursue litigation instead, then that is her choice. But I will defend myself fully and completely, and I will make sure the truth comes out. The problem was, Karen's version of the truth was already being carefully constructed. By the next morning, Sarah discovered that Karen had posted photos of 3 purebred Wyandotte chicks alongside photos of her birds in Sarah's coop. The similarity was striking. Karen had also posted a veterinary report documenting stress-related behavioral disorders in her remaining flock, dated to the period when the birds were missing. She'd posted emails from the breeder confirming that she'd purchased the 3 birds in question. And she'd posted something else, a video of her daughter, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old, crying about missing her chickens. It was devastatingly effective. Because the court of public opinion didn't care about technicalities or default passwords or the possibility that Karen had orchestrated the whole thing. The court of public opinion saw a little girl who'd lost her chickens and a woman who apparently had them. The responses to Karen's posts were swift and largely in her favor. People Sarah had considered allies in the community began to comment in support of Karen. One person asked if Sarah had no shame keeping someone else's children's pets. Another suggested that Sarah should be reported to the county for running an illegal operation. Karen had flipped the script completely. Now Sarah was the aggressor, and Karen was the victim of a baseless accusation. Sarah sat in her house that night, watching her standing in the community collapse, and realized that Karen had been playing this game far longer than she had. Karen knew exactly how to weaponize public opinion. Karen knew exactly how to present herself as the reasonable one, the defender, the person just trying to protect her family. And Sarah, who thought documentation and transparency would be her shield, had instead handed Karen all the ammunition she needed. The 48-hour deadline had passed. Karen hadn't followed through with her threats yet, but Sarah knew she would. She was waiting, letting the public sentiment shift, letting Sarah's credibility erode. And then, when Sarah was at her most vulnerable, Karen would strike. What Sarah didn't know yet was that Karen had already struck. She'd already been working on something far more damaging than a single lawsuit. Sarah's nightmare was only just beginning. The animal control officer arrived on a Wednesday morning with a notice stapled to Sarah's front door. It was brief and official. Her property had been reported as having unsanitary conditions and excessive numbers of animals. An inspection was scheduled for the following Monday. Sarah called the county office immediately. "Who filed the complaint?" she asked. The woman on the phone was professional but distant. "We don't release the identities of complainants, but I can tell you that we received documentation of poor animal care at your address." "What documentation?" "I can't discuss an open investigation," the woman said. Sarah hung up. She didn't need them to tell her who'd filed it. She already knew. She spent the next 4 days preparing. She hired a professional cleaner and had the entire property power washed. She checked and double-checked the coop, made sure every board was secure, every water dish clean, every corner of the operation documented and perfect. She consulted the county regulations online. She had 17 chickens and the legal limit was 25. She was well within compliance. But compliance with regulations and compliance with KARENS expectations were two different things. The animal control officer, a tired-looking man named Raymond Morris, arrived on Monday morning. He spent 45 minutes examining the coop, checking the chickens for signs of illness or mistreatment, reviewing Sarah's records of feed and water and the bird's health history. "Everything looks fine," he said finally. "More than fine, actually. These are well-cared-for birds." "Then the complaint is dismissed?" Sarah asked. "I'll file a report saying the property appears to be in compliance," Raymond said. "But whether the complaint gets dismissed depends on whether it's pursued further." "Pursued by who?" Sarah asked. "The person who filed it," Raymond said. "If they believe there's ongoing abuse, they can keep reporting it." Sarah felt the trap tightening. This was the genius of KAREN's strategy. There was no single point at which she could win. She couldn't satisfy KAREN because KAREN didn't actually want satisfaction. KAREN wanted Sarah gone, and if Sarah couldn't be forced out legally through the chickens, then KAREN would simply change tactics. 2 days later, a notice from the county road department appeared on her mailbox. Someone had reported a section of her property boundary as having encroaching brush and potential drainage issues. An inspector would be by to assess the situation. The next day, a letter from the neighborhood HOA informed her that she'd never registered her chickens with the HOA, and that failure to comply with HOA regulations could result in fines. Sarah called the HOA president. "This entire property is outside the HOA," she said. "I don't live in the residential development. I never signed the HOA covenant." "Correct," the HOA president said. "But you live adjacent to the development, and your chickens are considered part of the agricultural zoning, which is technically regulated by the county. And the county has a mutual understanding with our HOA to maintain consistent standards." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means we can fine you if your property affects our property values," the HOA president said, "which the chickens apparently do, according to several concerned residents." Sarah tried to fight each individual complaint. She hired a county inspector to verify that her drainage was fine. She cut back the brush. She registered with the HOA, paying a $200 registration fee for the privilege of maintaining the same property she already owned. But it was never enough. By mid-March, Sarah had received 4 more complaints. The road department wanted to inspect a section of her fence. The health department showed up claiming someone had reported unsanitary conditions. A county assessor arrived unannounced, presumably to verify that Sarah wasn't running a commercial operation, which, technically, selling eggs would make it, though Sarah had never sold a single egg. Each complaint, taken individually, was minor. Each could be resolved, but collectively they were exhausting. More than exhausting, they were financially draining. Each inspector required her to take time off work. Each one required preparation and documentation and the constant stress of wondering what KAREN's next angle would be. Sarah's job was suffering. She worked remotely as a project manager for a tech company and her productivity was tanking. She missed deadlines. She forgot conference calls. By early April, her manager pulled her into a video meeting and asked if everything was okay. "I'm dealing with a situation with a neighbor," Sarah said carefully. "It's taking some of my focus." "I'm going to need you to unfocus from the neighbor and refocus on work," her manager said, not unkindly. "Your performance is slipping. I need you back to normal by end of quarter, or we're going to have a different conversation." Sarah tried to improve. She really did. But it was like trying to bail out a boat that had a hole in the bottom. Every time she got her head above water professionally, another complaint would arrive and she'd be pulled back under. In the second week of April, she received the most damaging complaint yet. A letter from a lawyer on KAREN's behalf, informing her that KAREN was filing for an order of harassment and requesting that Sarah be ordered by the court to cease and desist from making defamatory statements about KAREN on social media. The letter referenced Sarah's Facebook post and suggested that Sarah's accusation that KAREN had somehow planted the birds was a deliberate and malicious lie designed to damage KAREN's reputation. There was evidence attached. screenshots of comments from Sarah's original post, some of which did make KARENS sound like a villain. The lawyer was also requesting that if Sarah continued the harassment, KARENS would pursue civil damages. "She's suing me for defamation," Sarah said out loud in her empty kitchen. She called Patricia Chen, the lawyer she'd spoken to before. "I can't take your case," Patricia said, which was the first thing she said. "I'm too expensive for this and you don't have the resources, but I can recommend someone, and I'm going to tell you this plainly, you made a strategic error." "By posting on Facebook?" Sarah asked. "By posting on Facebook without having a lawyer review it first," Patricia said. "KARENS playing a different game than you are. You were trying to set the record straight. She was building evidence for a lawsuit, and you helped her." Sarah found a lawyer who could afford, barely. His name was Marcus Diaz, and he defended people in harassment and defamation cases before. His fee was $1,500 for a retainer, and then $250 per hour after that. Sarah took money from her savings and hired him. "Here's where you stand," Marcus said in their first meeting. "KARENS filing for an order of harassment based on your social media posts. She'll argue that your accusations are defamatory, meaning they're false statements designed to harm her reputation. You'll argue that what you said is true, that she's systematically intimidated neighbors into leaving the community." "Which is true," Sarah said. "True in your experience, maybe," Marcus said. "But provable in court, that's a different question. She'll argue that she's simply been exercising her legal right to complain about neighborhood issues. She'll point out that she's been cooperative with all legal processes, and she'll say that you made false accusations about her deliberately planting birds, which you can't prove." "Can't I use the Facebook evidence, showing what she's done to other neighbors?" "You can try," Marcus said. "But here's the problem, context is complicated in court. Each case is individual. Just because KARENS filed complaints about other neighbors doesn't prove she orchestrated the bird situation. It just shows she's litigious, which isn't technically illegal." "So I'm going to lose," Sarah said. "I didn't say that," Marcus said. "But I'm saying the odds aren't in your favor, and the process is going to be expensive and stressful, and it's not going to stop the other complaints." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. The only way to win was to give up, to take down the Facebook post, to apologize, to cede the moral ground to KARENS and accept that in a contest between a woman with resources and legal support and a woman with chickens and a mortgage, there was only one winner. She did it that night. She wrote a carefully worded statement that said she had reconsidered her earlier accusations and that she respected KARENS' right to pursue legal complaints, even if she disagreed with the motivations. She apologized for any misunderstandings and said she hoped they could move forward. It was the most gutless thing she'd ever written. It made her feel physically sick. But she posted it. And within an hour, KARENS had filed a notice dismissing her harassment claim. It was, Sarah realized, exactly what KARENS had wanted all along. Not a court victory, but public capitulation. Proof that her tactics worked. Proof that if you pushed hard enough, people would break. The animal control complaints stopped. The drainage inspections stopped. The road department stopped showing up. It was like a switch had been flipped. KARENS had won. What Sarah didn't know, as she sat in her kitchen reading news, that she'd been vindicated in all the technical matters but defeated in every way that mattered, was that KARENS wasn't done. KARENS had simply moved to the next phase. Not all of them, but the 3 that KARENS claimed were hers, the Wyandottes that looked similar enough to pass for the originals. She was releasing back into the wild, far away from her property. She'd watched videos on YouTube about it. She'd chosen a location 30 miles away, a rural area with farms and free-roaming birds. She'd wait until evening when people were less likely to see her, and she'd open their crate at the edge of a wooded area and let them go. It wasn't a solution. KARENS had won whether Sarah kept the birds or not. But maybe, if Sarah just removed the source of conflict, the rest of her life could go back to normal. She was desperate for normal. She was losing weight. She hadn't slept more than 5 hours a night in weeks. Her work was still suffering, and her manager had indicated that there might be layoffs coming and that Sarah's performance was concerning. Her savings were dwindling. She'd spent nearly $3,000 on legal fees, and she had nothing to show for it except a public apology to the woman who'd systematically destroyed her sense of safety in her own home. So on a Thursday evening in early May, Sarah loaded 3 Wyandotte chickens into a secured crate and drove 30 miles west to a farm community in Middleton County. She parked at the edge of a public access area, waited until no one was looking, and opened the crate. The birds, confused, pecked at the ground and looked around. After a moment, one of them, probably the one that had once been called Snowball when it had belonged to Sarah, walked toward the woods. The other two followed. Sarah waited until they disappeared into the tree line. Then she drove home, feeling both relieved and devastated. She'd given her bird away. She'd done exactly what Karen wanted her to do. That evening, she posted on the community Facebook page, "I've decided that the stress of this situation is not worth it. I've released the 3 birds in question to a natural habitat where they can live freely. I hope this brings closure to everyone involved." The response was instantaneous. "So you did have our birds," someone commented. "Finally taking responsibility," Karen had written, though her post was deleted within minutes. But the damage was done. In admitting that she'd had the birds and had released them, Sarah had essentially confessed to the original accusation. Never mind that she'd maintained, correctly, that she'd purchased them legitimately. In the court of public opinion, the narrative was now. Sarah had stolen the birds and finally gave them back. Sarah closed the app and didn't open it again for 3 days. When she did, she found something that made her blood go cold. Karen had posted a photo. It was a screenshot of what looked like a veterinary record. The caption read, "Just want everyone to know what happened to the birds Sarah Merchant released. We located them at a wildlife refuge 30 miles away. The refuge staff found them abandoned and malnourished. One died from exposure. We brought the other 2 back to our vet for care. The vet bill was $847, which I've already been compensated for. But I wanted to show our community what happens when animals are treated this way." Sarah's chest stopped. She looked at the photo more carefully. It was a legitimate-looking vet record with dates and diagnostic information. The vet's logo was in the corner. It was fake, it had to be fake, but it looked real. Sarah called her lawyer. Marcus Diaz sounded grim when he answered. "I've seen it," he said, "and I've already contacted the vet clinic. They have no record of treating any birds for Karen Whitmore." "So it's forged," Sarah said. "Probably," Marcus said, "but proving that is going to require action from you. You could file a complaint with the state bar for fraudulent document submission. You could pursue a defamation suit for the false claim that a bird died. But Sarah, that requires more money, more lawyers, more time." "I can't do this anymore," Sarah said quietly. "I know," Marcus said, and he did. She could hear it in his voice. He'd seen plenty of people break under the weight of persistent legal and social warfare. "What do I do?" Sarah asked. "You could try to prove the document is fake," Marcus said. "You could go after Karen for fraud, or you could let it go. You could accept that she's one, move forward with your life, and understand that this says nothing about you and everything about her." Sarah didn't respond. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I know that's not the answer you want." After she hung up, Sarah looked around her house, at the books lining the shelves, at the artwork she'd chosen specifically because she loved it, not because it matched anyone else's aesthetic, at the life she'd built deliberately and carefully on her own terms. She'd moved here to escape people like Karen, and Karen had followed her here, or perhaps had already been here, waiting for someone exactly like Sarah to move in so she'd have someone to destroy. Sarah opened her laptop and searched, "Relocation services, how to sell a house quickly, real estate agents near me." She couldn't beat Karen, but she could leave. She called an agent the next morning and listed the house for sale at a price slightly below market. She explained to the agent that she was motivated and needed a quick closing. The agent looked concerned but didn't ask too many questions. In a market like this, property moved fast. The first showing was that Saturday. By the following Wednesday, she'd received 2 offers. She accepted the lower one from a young couple who were thrilled to get the property, who wanted it for the land, and who seemed genuinely interested in keeping the remaining chickens. Sarah went through the closing in a fog. She packed her belongings into boxes. She said goodbye to her 13 remaining birds, watching them cluster around the Wyandottes who weren't Wyandottes, the ones who'd started this whole terrible chain of events. On the afternoon she was supposed to leave, she received a text from an unknown number. "I heard you're leaving. Good decision. You never belonged here anyway, and just so you know, the vet record is real. One of your birds died. But you probably don't care since you care about birds the way you care about people, not at all. Sarah looked at that text for a long time, then she deleted it, not because it didn't hurt, but because she was done. She was done responding, done engaging, done trying to make Karen understand or care or see her as anything other than a problem to be solved. She closed her car trunk on the last box, took one final look at the house that was no longer hers, and drove away. She told herself she was taking the moral high ground by leaving, but if she was honest with herself, she knew what this really was: surrender, complete and unconditional. Karen had achieved exactly what she'd set out to do. She'd removed an obstacle to her vision of how the neighborhood should be, and the woman she'd done it to had been broken by the process. Sarah drove for hours, not really having a destination, just knowing that she needed to be away. She found herself on a highway heading north, toward the city where she'd grown up. She had friends there. She had a job that, if she handled it right, might transition to a new position. She had options, even if none of them felt like victories. As she drove, Sarah thought about each moment where things could have gone differently. If she'd changed that lock on the Coop, if she hadn't posted to Facebook, if she'd simply accepted the bird as gone and moved on, if she'd been the kind of person who could just apologize for things she hadn't done and felt no shame about it. But those thoughts were pointless. She hadn't made those choices. And she was here, leaving everything she'd built, because she'd been destroyed by someone with more time, more money, more willingness to pursue a vendetta, and more understanding of how to weaponize the systems that were supposed to protect people like Sarah. She didn't know, as she drove north, that this wasn't actually the end of the story. She didn't know that Karen Whitmore had made exactly one mistake in her carefully orchestrated campaign. One small thing that would, eventually, come back to haunt her. But that mistake had been recorded, documented, and there was someone who'd been paying very close attention all along. 6 months after Sarah left, her phone rang while she was at her new job in the city. The number was unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Merchant," a woman's voice, older, with an accent Sarah didn't immediately place. "Yes," Sarah said carefully. "My name is Patricia Morrison. I'm calling from the Ridgemont Heights community. We haven't met, but I'm calling about your situation with Karen Whitmore." Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd been trying very hard not to think about Karen or the community or any of it. "I don't think there's anything to talk about," Sarah said. "Please don't hang up," Patricia said. "I think you should know something, and I think other people should know it too." "What?" Sarah asked. "Karen Whitmore is doing to someone else what she did to you," Patricia said. "A family moved in about 2 months ago. They have a teenage son with autism who has some behavioral issues that can be quite loud. They're good people, really good people. But Karen has decided that the boy's existence is a nuisance to the community, and she's filed 3 separate complaints. She's organized a petition, and she's been posting things on Facebook that are, well, they're cruel. They're disability discrimination." Sarah closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be sorry," Patricia said. "Be helpful. I've started documenting everything, and I know I'm not the only one. Your situation was the wake-up call. People started paying attention to what Karen does, and we realized that it's a pattern, a long pattern." "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. "I want you to consider coming back," Patricia said. "Or at least sending me everything you have, documentation of what happened to you, records of the complaints, video footage, all of it, because I think it's time Karen Whitmore faced actual consequences." Sarah sat with that for a long moment. "I don't want to be part of this," she said finally. "I understand," Patricia said. "And I'm not going to pressure you, but if you change your mind, call me back. The family with the autistic son, they're being bullied out of their home just like you were, and I think we can stop it. But we need evidence. We need people willing to testify." Sarah hung up without committing to anything. But she thought about it. For days, she thought about it. She thought about the family she'd never met, facing the same machinery of destruction that had been turned on her. She thought about how Karen would never stop. How there would always be another neighbor who didn't fit, another person to target, another house for Karen to drive someone out of. And she thought about the fact that she'd run away without fighting, that she'd allowed Karen to win without any real consequences. On a Thursday evening, Sarah called Patricia back. "Tell me everything," Sarah said. Patricia had been documenting obsessively. She'd created a detailed timeline of Karen's behavior going back 7 years. She'd talked to the family with the autistic son, who were terrified but willing to participate. She'd interviewed the woman with the blue house, who'd kept a journal during her ordeal. She'd talked to Marcus Washington about the community garden. She'd even tracked down the elderly couple who'd moved to Florida and gotten them on a video call. "Here's what we have," Patricia said. "A 7-year pattern of targeting specific individuals based on them not conforming to KARENS' vision of the community. We have evidence that she's orchestrated campaigns against at least 12 different families or individuals. We have documentation that several people left the community specifically because of her actions. And we have a current victim willing to testify about ongoing harassment and disability discrimination." "What about my situation?" Sarah asked. "Your situation is the linchpin," Patricia said, "because I got in touch with the breeder you mentioned, the one who supposedly sold Karen the birds." Sarah's heart skipped. "He's upstate," Patricia continued. "But he has records. He keeps really detailed records because of the licensing requirements for purebred birds. And guess what? He has no record of selling any birds to Karen Whitmore, ever. But he does have a record of selling 6 birds to a farm operator named Dale Miller, who then sold them to you." "So I did buy them legitimately," Sarah said quietly. "You did," Patricia said. "And more than that, we can prove it. The breeder is willing to testify. He has purchase orders. He has shipping records. He can establish a clear chain of custody. And here's the best part. Karen never approached the breeder. She never asked about the birds' origins. She just assumed you'd stolen them, filed false reports, and orchestrated the entire thing." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. A weight lifting that she hadn't realized was still sitting there. "But there's more," Patricia said. "The default combination on your Coop lock, Dale Miller, the farm operator, he contacted me. Apparently Karen had called him asking about the original purchase, and he'd been confused by her accusations because he'd never sold her anything. But he'd mentioned the old Coop design and the default combination to someone. He wasn't even sure who at this point, and he wondered if Karen had looked it up online. I did some research. The Coop manufacturer's website has the manual available for download. And there are at least 3 posts from people online discussing the default combination because they'd forgotten to change it." "So Karen could have found it," Sarah said. "Karen could have found it," Patricia confirmed. "And more than that, we can show that she had the knowledge and means to access your Coop. We can establish opportunity. There are several nights when she was unaccounted for, during the window when the birds could have been moved. And we can establish motive. You'd moved into her neighborhood and were living in a way she didn't approve of." "That's not proof," Sarah said. "It's not proof," Patricia agreed. "But it's enough to create reasonable doubt about whether she's telling the truth. And combined with everything else, the pattern of behavior, the false documentation, the coordinated campaign, it paints a picture." Sarah asked the question she'd been afraid to ask. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to give a deposition," Patricia said. "I want you to detail what happened to you, how Karen's actions affected you, and what you believe really occurred with the birds. And I want you to let me use all of this in a civil suit against Karen Whitmore for harassment, tortious interference, and fraud." "She could countersue me for defamation," Sarah said. "She could," Patricia said, "but she won't win, because everything you'll be saying will be truthful and you can prove it. She, on the other hand, has been making provably false statements about you, the birds, and the vet records." Sarah wanted to say no. She wanted to tell Patricia that she was done, that she'd moved on, that she didn't have the energy to fight this battle again. But she thought about the family with the autistic son. She thought about how they were probably experiencing right now exactly what she'd experienced. The panic, the helplessness, the slow realization that the system wasn't designed to protect them from people like Karen. "Okay," Sarah said. "Yeah," Patricia said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. "Yeah," Sarah said, "let's destroy her." What happened next was methodical and relentless. Patricia filed a civil suit against Karen Whitmore on behalf of the family with the autistic son, claiming harassment and tortious interference with their ability to enjoy their property. She filed a separate suit on behalf of Sarah, claiming fraud, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Sarah's deposition was devastating. She detailed everything: the security footage, the missing chicken, the legal demands, the mounting complaints from every county office, the psychological toll. She described lying awake at night wondering what Karen's next move would be. She described the shame of her public apology for something she hadn't done. She showed the property records of her sale, the price she'd taken that was below market, all the proof of how much KARENS' campaign had cost her. And then Patricia showed her the evidence. The breeder's testimony established that the birds were never KARENS. The Coop manufacturer confirmed that the manual with the default combination was freely available online. Forensic analysis of the vet record KAREN had posted showed signs of digital manipulation, specific pixels that didn't match up, metadata that didn't align with a legitimate veterinary office's system. But the real evidence came from Tom, Sarah's neighbor. Patricia had tracked him down and convinced him to provide a deposition. And Tom, apparently racked with guilt over his role in the situation, admitted that KAREN had approached him shortly before the birds appeared in Sarah's coop. She'd asked if he could accidentally leave Sarah's gate open one night. She'd offered him $500 to do it. He'd refused, but he also hadn't told Sarah. And a week later, the birds appeared. "Did you give KAREN access to Sarah's property?" Patricia asked him during the deposition. "No," Tom said, "but I think she had a spare key to the coop, the kind you can get from the manufacturer if you order the manual and the lock comes with it. She knew the combination was default. I never told her how to get in, but I think she figured it out on her own." With Tom's testimony, the pattern became clear. KAREN had accessed the coop, probably sometime when Sarah was out of town. She'd put her daughter's birds in alongside Sarah's birds. She'd documented them being there. Then she'd gone to the police claiming they were missing. Then she'd retrieved them on camera, creating evidence of theft. It was so calculated that even the judge, a woman named Helen Martinez, seemed genuinely disturbed. "You orchestrated this entire scenario," Judge Martinez said during a hearing, looking directly at KAREN. "I did no such thing," KAREN said. "I retrieved my daughter's stolen property." "You put your daughter's birds into Ms. Merchant's coop without permission," Judge Martinez said. "You filed false reports with animal control. You created a false veterinary document. And you conducted a sustained campaign of harassment against someone who had done nothing to you except exist in a way you didn't approve of." "That's not," KAREN started. "The evidence is clear," Judge Martinez said. "The court finds for the plaintiffs on all counts." The damages were substantial. Sarah received $47,000 for economic losses and emotional distress. The family with the autistic son received $32,000 for harassment and tortious interference, and KAREN was ordered to pay all attorney fees for both cases. But the civil victory was followed by something else. During the course of the civil litigation, evidence had emerged that KAREN had filed false reports with the police and animal control. Patricia had provided all of this to the prosecutor's office. Within a month, KAREN Whitmore was charged with filing false police reports, fraud, trespassing, and harassment. The criminal case took longer. KAREN fought it vigorously, hired expensive lawyers, tried every legal maneuver she could. But the evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was consistent, and gradually, systematically, her defenses crumbled. In the end, she accepted a plea deal. 2 years probation, 240 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. She also accepted the reality that her life in Ridgemont Heights was over. Sarah was sitting at her new apartment in the city, reviewing the final documents, when she got a notification on her phone. A Facebook post from someone in the Ridgemont Heights community group. "KAREN Whitmore and her family have listed their house for sale. They're moving to New Jersey. Guess she finally got tired of her own neighborhood." There were 247 comments, most of them taking some degree of satisfaction in her departure. Sarah closed the app without reading more. She'd won, legally, morally, practically, she'd won, but it had cost her everything. She'd lost her home, her community, nearly a year of her life. She'd had to fight tooth and nail for the simple right to exist on her own terms. And KAREN, while punished, had simply moved on to a new community, where she could presumably start the process all over again with some other person who didn't fit her requirements. Sarah opened her email and drafted a message to Patricia. "Thank you for what you did. It took courage and persistence, but I want you to know, winning this lawsuit doesn't make it okay. What happened to me still happened. I still had to leave everything I'd built. And as long as people like KAREN can move to new communities and do the same thing to new people, we haven't really solved the problem." Patricia's response came back within an hour. "You're right, we haven't solved the problem, but we've established a precedent. We've shown that this behavior has legal consequences. And we've created a paper trail that can be used against her if she tries again. It's not perfect, but it's something, and sometimes something is all we can get. Sarah set her phone down and looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd started to build in the city, at her new job, which was finally stabilizing, at the friends who'd stuck by her through the ordeal. She wasn't the same person who'd moved to Ashford Road to escape the city. She was harder now, more cynical. She'd learned that systems weren't fair, that victory often felt like loss, and that sometimes the best outcome was simply to survive. But she'd also learned that she wasn't alone, that other people had experienced KARENS tactics, that when you stopped running and started fighting, others would stand beside you. Sarah opened her laptop and began writing. Not a lawsuit, not a Facebook post, but a complete account of what had happened. A detailed analysis of how KAREN had orchestrated the campaign, every tactic, every psychological manipulation, every step of the journey. She wrote it clearly and carefully, no longer afraid of defamation claims because everything she wrote was true. She sent copies to the prosecutor, to Patricia, to the family with the autistic son. And then she saved a copy for herself, knowing that someday, somewhere, it might help someone else survive what she had survived. The story wasn't over. It would never be over because there would always be more KARENS, more targets, more communities where someone's vision of perfection required the destruction of anyone who didn't fit. But Sarah had learned how to survive it. And that, in the end, was its own kind of victory. Sarah was having coffee with Patricia when she got the email. It was forwarded to her by the prosecutor's office in Jersey City. KAREN Whitmore had been arrested. Again. New Jersey, new community, same tactics. A family with adopted children from Africa, a woman who'd started a community composting operation, a man who was running a small business from his home. And KAREN had decided that these people didn't belong and had started her systematic campaign of complaints, false reports, and psychological warfare. But this time, there was a difference. The prosecutor had had access to Sarah's case files. They recognized the pattern immediately. And when they investigated, they found that KAREN's accusations were suspiciously similar to the false claims she'd made in New Jersey. The crimes were more serious this time because there was a pattern. KAREN was charged with racketeering, running an organized scheme to harass and defraud neighbors. "She's going to prison," Patricia said, looking at the email over Sarah's shoulder. "This time, she's actually going to serve time." Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Not triumph exactly, not even satisfaction, but something like closure. "I guess we did solve the problem after all," Sarah said quietly. "No," Patricia said, "but we solved KAREN's problem, and sometimes that's enough." Sarah finished her coffee and looked out the window at the city streets below. Somewhere out there, someone else was probably dealing with someone like KAREN. Someone else was probably discovering that their beloved chickens had become a weapon in a war they hadn't started. But Sarah was not going to think about that today. Today, she was just going to be grateful that her fight was over, that she'd survived it. And that sometimes, if you were patient and persistent and willing to stand your ground, justice did catch up.